oceans are becoming the battleground of a merciless war between countries trying to grab fishing resources. Conflicts cannot be avoided. There are too many boats and fewer fish. On March 9, 1995, a high seas confrontation took place on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. After firing several warning shots, the Canadian Coast Guard boarded and inspected the Estai, a Spanish fishing boat.
I mean, this is grossly illegal. That's right. But how could this get out through? You know, see, that's immature fish, you can't escape.
For the first time, Canada had flexed its muscles. As its own fishing industry was being threatened by diminishing stocks, it was determined to protect its territorial waters.
It tells you the stock may be in even worse shape than we thought. We knew the stock was in trouble. It may be in worse shape, and it argues that we need to take a second look.
The Spanish fishermen proclaimed their innocence and were indignant at being treated like pirates. The incident, fully covered by the media, was brought before an international tribunal. As the sea's resources disappear, this kind of incident will happen more and more often. The spotlight of the moment has faded, but in Vigo, Galicia, nobody has forgotten the seizure of the Estai. Vigo is a fishing port, the most important in Spain. Each year, 400,000 tons of fish are landed here, almost half of the national production. Xavier Aboy Perez is the spokesman for a Galician fishermen's union. He is convinced that the Canadian show of force was not intended to protect fish stocks, but was rather a resource grab.
El problema de fondo es un problema político y económico. La pesca es un gran negocio.
The real issue is both political and economic. Fishing and fish marketing is big business.
Major
multinational companies keep their claws on the industry. The Galician fleet fishes all over the world. If you eliminate that fleet, someone still has to bring in the fish. The halibut war was an imperialist business war initiated by the Canadians.
Cuando nosotros, concienciados y que la población gallega incluso,
after the halibut affair and the boarding of the Estai, we realized that they were playing with our daily food, and people became much more aware of the impact of the fishing industry on our region.
Galicians are different from other Spaniards. Of Celtic origin, like the Bretons, they have their own culture and language and are very proud of their maritime traditions. Here in Vigo, they tell the story of a treasure sitting in a galleon that sunk in the bay. But for Galicians, the most beautiful treasure remains the fish. In Spain, the annual average fish consumption is 40 kilos per person.
You must know that everything on this coast is more or less related to the fishing industry. Shipyards, cold storage facilities, docks, machine shops, and canning factories. Everything depends on fishing. Not only in Vigo, but all along the Marazzo Peninsula. There is no other industry.
Spain has the largest fishing fleet of the European Union. Nevertheless, it must import 1 million tons of fish every year. For centuries, Spanish fishermen have sailed all over the world, but now increased international competition is undermining their industry.
que llegó a ser de 200 barcos, 200 grandes barcos.
The refrigeration fleet used to have 200 large ships. Today, only 80 remain. The others have been disassembled or sail under other flags. But several are still bringing their catch here and invade our market. Why? Because it's big business.
¿Por qué? Porque es un negocio.
Like all people who draw sustenance from the sea, Galicians know that fishing is at the heart of their national identity. Today, Galicia is fighting to save its industry and the 35,000 jobs that depend on it.
Si falta la pesca, no hay otra salida. En otros tiempos, Galicia fue un pueblo de migrantes a todo el mundo, a América en una determinada.
If the fishery falls apart, we have no way out. In the past, Galicians have emigrated to America, Europe, or Australia. Today, it's no longer possible. There are economic crises almost everywhere, even in Canada, in Quebec. If fishing, a primary industry, shrinks even more, the Galician way of life is going to disappear.
Si se corta más de lo que está, es la desaparición de Galicia como pueblo.
Va, listo. Finito, te.
On the other side of the Atlantic, fishermen from the Gaspé are also fighting to save what is left of their economy and their identity. Overfishing and the race for profit have had disastrous consequences for the coastal communities. Here, no fishing boats set out from port. The big cod trawlers are not used anymore and remain tied to the docks. Pressured by governments, the small fishermen transformed themselves into industrial fishermen. To be competitive with foreign fleets, they bought large, very expensive boats fitted with the latest technology. But the fish stocks could not survive the pillage. Today, up to their ears in debt, the fishermen are trapped without work and without a future. And they are bitter and angry.
Personne n'a le droit d'oublier que tant de monde vivait, puis tant de monde vivait bien. Alors à ce moment-là, on est prêt.
We are ready to fight, to go to war to get those jobs back, and to let the ocean become richer than it is
La mer
today.
devienne beaucoup plus riche qu'elle l'est présentement.
The Gaspé landscapes are as beautiful as ever, but the villages are emptying. Their maritime traditions are becoming folklore, a tourist attraction. For generations, the entire Gaspé coast lived from the sea. The great shoals of cod seemed inexhaustible. People came from everywhere to partake of the manna. Rows of cod flakes erected on the beaches were part of the landscape. The salted cod, dried in the sun and wind of the Gulf, was sold around the world. Today, on the few remaining flakes, cod from the Barents Sea is drying. Cod bought from Russian fishermen, whose fleet participated in the pillage of cod stocks of the North Atlantic Ocean.
In 30 years, the fishing industry has destroyed everything. So for us, it is very clear. We must step back, we must return to using equipment that respects the ocean and the species that live in it.
The merciless competition between the oversized fleets puts the survival of the species at peril. As the resources diminish, the tension increases and the fishermen become more aggressive.
Un pêcheur, c'est très patient. Très, très patient, je dirais même.
A fisherman is very patient. Very, very patient, I would say. But at one point, when you have a hard time meeting your family's financial needs, patience gives way to unpleasant, even dangerous reactions.
À des scènes disgracieuses, on dirait même dangereuses.
Everywhere on the planet, the best fishing zones are the most coveted. Skirmishes between rival fleets happen more often. Here in France, in Les Sables d'Olonne, every fisherman remembers the last confrontation with the Spanish.
I remember in 95 or 96, we had a conflict with Spanish fishermen. They told us to take up our equipment and go back home. They said they had 8 boats for every French boat in the area, and if we refused to go, they would send our boats and crews to the bottom. We had to leave. Yes, it was a war.
Retired captains and young fishermen are proud of the maritime traditions of Les Sables d'Olonne, but the glory days of this large fishing port in Vendée now belongs to the past.
Lots of little jobs depended on the fishing industry. Before, every afternoon at the wharf at 2 o'clock, the fishermen would sell their freshly caught fish, their small catch. If we could hear our grandfathers talk about the past, they had good times and bad times. But what has happened the last years is really tragic. Look at this port that used to be full of fishing boats. Today, it is empty.
In the 17th century, 100 boats left from here every year to go fishing on the Grand Banks. Today, it's the sailing race Vendée Globe and the sea resort which boosts the city's economy. All the great fishing ports will eventually have to change. The United Nations has raised the alarm. The size of the worldwide fishery is destroying fish species one after the other.
Les hommes se sont comportés comme si les mers étaient inépuisables.
Man has behaved as if the sea's resources were inexhaustible, even when he knew they were not. But today he knows. Still, he often behaves like me first, and after that, I don't care. It's a way of hiding your head in the sand. The Europeans didn't do any better. By the end of the 80s, especially in France, we began to use very high-tech, sophisticated boats, subsidized by the European community, the region, the big port cities, etc., without caring if the stocks would be sufficient.
De kilowatts. Cette pression accrue sur les stocks.
Jean Chaussade is a geographer and an expert in sea resources. He lives in the region of Les Sables d'Olonne and campaigns for a reasonable use of modern fishing equipment.
Avec nos moyens technologiques, techniques, on a eu la capacité, et on a la capacité.
Thanks to technology, we have been able to skim off the cream of the seas, to exploit them from the surface to the depths. We can catch absolutely every living creature in a sector of the hydrosphere, and of course, that is extremely dangerous. We call it an halutic genocide. It is a real disaster. We are transforming the sea into a biological desert.
Tout ce qui est vivant dans un secteur de la mer, c'est véritablement catastrophique. Parce que à ce moment-là, ça devient, on transforme la mer en un désert biologique.
Fish are in danger, but fishermen are also a species at risk. The old sailors are indignant to see greed overtaking common sense.
L'artisanal, ça nourrit beaucoup plus de personnes. Parce que ce qu'il faut regarder dans tout, c'est que l'homme mange, l'homme vive.
Man has to eat in order to live. It's not money that matters. People have to live. And our youth, we have to think about tomorrow. It's over for us now. But even in the afterlife, we will still be seamen. It's in us. That's the way we are.
Marin. Et puis je crois que au-delà de la mort, on sera toujours marin. C'est en nous, ça. Vous voyez, on le vit, ça.
Here the fishermen's struggle is pitiless. Every day they risk their lives. In St. Louis de Senegal, danger comes from everywhere. From the elements, the surf they have to cross, the ships cruising nearby, and from the precarious work conditions.
C'est dans ce genre de bateau, n'est-ce pas? C'est dans ce genre de bateau, nous on les appelle des pirogues.
It is in this kind of boat that we call a pirogue that he has been fishing from age 17 to 55. Look at this pirogue, how very small it is. The fishermen leave for 8 to 10 days and spend all their time in the boat. They cook and sleep on board. The cramped quarters of the boat, the sea conditions, the surf, lead to many drownings.
Généralement, avec l'état de la mer, nous avons la barre, nous avons l'embouchure, il y a des noyades.
Mr. Fall here has lost 8 members of his family this year.
Oui, j'ai au moins 8 personnes cette année-ci qui sont disparues en mer.
Yes, at least 8 of my relatives have been lost at sea this year. First I lost 2 cousins, and then 7 people disappeared on their way to Niaga near Mauritania. Their pirogue capsized at the mouth of the river. That makes a total of 9.
Donc ça fait 9.
Poverty and drought in the interior of Senegal have brought people to the coast. Many suddenly become seamen without knowing how to swim. They have no choice. The fish they'll catch today is their only wealth. But the profits go elsewhere, to strangers. These large ships off St. Louis sail under the Korean flag. The Senegalese do not have the means to exploit their offshore fishery. The fishermen from St. Louis get work on those foreign ships, a source of cheap labor.
We are forced to accept the working conditions imposed by the Koreans because we do not have the boats that would permit us to go where the big fish are. So they come and take us offshore to catch those big fish that we sell to them. The price is not fair, but we have no choice. We have to accept it if we want to survive.
On est obligé d'accepter ce prix pour pouvoir quand même vivre.
The fishery in Senegalese waters is highly coveted. The industrial fleets greedily search for new territories to exploit. Aruna Diagne protested the signing of the fishing treaty between Senegal and the European community. Senegal used to have lots of fish, but that is no longer the case. There is no more fish because of the large ships that come along our coast and bring back their catch to Europe. They do not have enough fish in their waters, so they come here. And that is a great disaster for Senegal.
Il y a ce dilemme, vendre leurs poissons.
They have a dilemma: sell their fish or choose a policy of food self-sufficiency. Between those two options, the natural inclination is to play the emergency card and say, we'll sell our protein to the highest bidder in return for the money that we need, and thus sacrificing the local people, which are undernourished.
Les gens, les populations, ces populations qui sont mal nourries.
Le poisson, on ne peut pas le manger. On ne peut pas manger les gros poissons que pêchent les grands bateaux.
The big fish caught on the large boats we cannot eat because we have to sell them in order to survive, so we have to eat the small ones, the sardines and the others that have no value.
Les chinchards, les poissons qui n'ont pas de valeur.
Le produit de base
The only source of animal protein that we have in our region, and in almost 3/4 of the country, comes from these little sardines. Everybody eats them. Without these little sardines, we would starve.
When there are no sardines for 2 or 3 days, the whole population of Saint Louis is penalized. There are no big fish that we can afford to buy, only sardines. And with the new fishing treaty, it will even be worse when they start fishing our little sardines.
Today, there are so many people fishing, so many nets twisting and turning, so many fishermen throwing lines, that the fish are sometimes scarce. In the past, there were fewer people, but now the population has quadrupled. Another reason why the fish have become scarce.
All over the world, coastal communities and fishermen disappear, vanquished one after the other. The high seas fishing wars are won every day by the industrial fleets. Profit at any price. Fast profit is the only existing fisheries strategy. I don't cry for myself, I cry for my children and my grandchildren, because tomorrow they won't have enough resources to feed themselves. The fishing industry is showing that the best armed and the wealthiest impose, without pity, the rules of the game, without any consideration for the resources or the people depending on them. Tomorrow, there'll be nothing left. And if there's nothing left, what are we fishermen going to do? We're not civil servants. We don't work in an office and get a paycheck. We're not farmers. We have no land to cultivate. We have only the ocean. And if the ocean has no more resources, where are we going to go? We'll go to the cemetery and we will wait for you.